While I lay unconscious in a hospital bed, my own children emptied my home, forged my signature, and tried to sell what was never theirs. But I had one move they never saw coming. I sold the house before they ever touched it. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel where betrayal, drama, and hidden truths come alive in every emotional story. And let us know where you are listening from in the comments. I remember the moment the nurse handed me my phone. My hands were still trembling from the IV drip, and the antiseptic smell in the room clung to my skin like shame I could not wash off. I had just come out of a 3-day coma. The doctors called it a miraculous recovery, but what waited on my phone was anything but miraculous. 3 missed calls from my neighbor Linda, 2 voicemails from the family attorney, and 1 short, heartless text from my eldest son, Matthew. It read, "Mom, we had to make a decision. The house is gone. We needed the money. We will talk when you are better." That text split my chest open wider than the surgery they had just performed on me. My hand went numb. My pulse quickened. And for a moment, I thought I would slip right back into unconsciousness. Not from pain, but from betrayal. They had sold my house. The house I built. The house I bled in. The house I held them in when they were infants and sat beside them when they had fevers. They sold it while I lay in a hospital bed, half dead. But what they did not know was this. I had already sold that house months ago. My name is Eleanor Grace Whitmore. I am 46 years old. I was born in Oregon, raised in a small pine-frame town where neighbors still wave from their porches, and the air always smells like cedar. I was the only child of a gentle mother and a father who believed that love was not something you said. It was something you worked for. That was the model I carried into my own life. I met Charles when I was 23. He had a quiet strength and the kind of smile that made you forget you were nervous. He was not a man of many words, but when he did speak, you listened. We built our life in that house on Pineview Lane, a modest 3-bedroom colonial, white shutters, ivy on the porch rails. Nothing grand, but it was ours. Every plank, every window pane held something sacred. We raised 3 children there, Matthew, Danielle, and Eric. Matthew, my firstborn, was the golden boy. Always the achiever. Always the one who made the honor roll, the sports captain, the boy everyone expected great things from. He carried a sense of responsibility that somewhere along the line turned into entitlement. Danielle, my only daughter, was sensitive, artistic, and easily swayed by stronger voices. She loved fiercely, but never learned how to defend her own heart. She was the peacekeeper, the one who tried to make everyone happy, and usually ended up hurt in the process. Eric, the youngest, was my gentle giant, always in his head, always asking questions about the stars, about why people lied, or why some people cried in their sleep. He was the one who held my hand at the funeral when Charles passed away 7 years ago. Charles's death was slow and cruel. Cancer does not come like a thief. It comes like a storm with no mercy. I took care of him until the end, bathing him when he could not move, feeding him when he could not chew. I swallowed my own grief because I had no choice. I was the pillar, the mother, the nurse, the widow, all in one. After he died, the house became quieter, heavier. Every creak in the hallway sounded like footsteps that would never come again. Still, I stayed. Not because I could not leave, but because I could not let go. That house was the last place his voice lived. But over time, grief evolved into something else. loneliness. I stopped sleeping through the night. I stopped sitting at the dinner table. I lived in pajamas most days. And still, not one of my children noticed. They came and went. Birthdays, holidays, a few rushed phone calls with forced "how are yous?" But they never really looked at me. Not really. They assumed I would always be there, like the old clock in the hallway that ticked whether anyone listened or not. Then came the fall. It was a simple accident. A wet floor in the kitchen. My hip shattered in 2 places. I lay on the cold tiles for nearly 5 hours before the mailman found me through the window. I remember his face when he broke the door open. Panic and pity. I hated the way he looked at me. At the hospital, they said I had been lucky, that it could have been worse. But the truth is, something did break that day. Not just the bone, something deeper. Something that had been holding me together. For the first time in years, I asked myself, what if I never go back to that house? What if I stopped being the one who held everything up? What would happen then? That question haunted me, and that was when I made the call to the real estate agent. I told no one, not because I was hiding, but because I wanted to remember what it felt like to make a decision just for me. I signed the paperwork 2 months later. Quietly, cleanly. The sale went through. The money was transferred to a separate account, and I kept living in that house because the new owners were a sweet young couple who agreed to let me stay while they prepared their relocation. I paid them rent quietly. No fuss, no discussion. I had no plans to tell my children, not yet. But fate, as always, had its own ideas. I had planned to tell them after Thanksgiving. One last holiday in the house, one final memory before I packed up the decades. I had imagined the smell of cinnamon rolls drifting through the kitchen, the windows fogged from warmth and laughter, Danielle placing cranberries too close to the edge of the table, Eric humming while setting the plates. But fate does not wait for your perfect timing. It barges in. It crashes through the door like thunder in the middle of a prayer. And for me, it came in the form of a sharp slip on the kitchen floor. It had rained the night before. I remember the soft patter of water outside, the quiet of the house around me. I had brewed tea, chamomile. I never even tasted it. My foot caught the edge of the rug, and the next moment, I was falling. There was no grace in the way I hit the ground, no slow-motion beauty, just the violent crack of bone against tile and the silent scream that never left my throat. The pain was immediate, radiating, paralyzing. I lay there for hours. I counted the seconds, counted the sound of my own breathing, counted the spaces between memories that came like waves. Charles's voice calling me Ellie girl. Danielle, age 5, tugging at my sweater and saying, "Mommy, I made this for you." Matthew's graduation speech, where he mentioned me without ever looking at me. Eric's hand shaking as he handed me the letter of acceptance into the university he did not want to attend, but felt he had to. I remembered it all, lying cold and helpless on my own kitchen floor. Time moved differently there. It stretched. It broke. It mocked me. When the mailman finally found me, it was not because anyone had noticed I was missing. It was because the porch light had been left on in the middle of the day, and he thought it looked odd. I remember his face. Shock. Concern. He tried not to let it show. But pity always finds its way into a man's eyes, even when he means well. They rushed me to the hospital. My hip had shattered. Clean break, emergency surgery, then the coma, then the machines, then the slow unraveling of everything I had planned to say. Instead, silence filled in the cracks where my voice should have been. And while I lay there, drowsy, sedated, helpless, they moved. My children. They whispered across phone lines, debated across group texts, made arrangements behind curtains I could not see. By the time I opened my eyes again, the world I knew had been rearranged. The nurses smiled gently, like I was a fragile thing. The doctor said I had been lucky, but the silence that followed said otherwise. Because luck would have meant waking up to my children beside me with open arms. Instead, I woke up to decisions already made, futures already signed. They had sold the house, and I had not even said goodbye. But what they did not know, what none of them had stopped to ask, was that I had already chosen my goodbye long before they planned mine. I had sold the house months before. Quietly, deliberately, without their approval, because I had needed to do something for myself, for the first time in decades. And now, as I lay in that hospital bed, with my bones stitched and soul bruised, I realized something with a clarity I had never known before. This was not just a betrayal. This was a beginning. The version of me who stayed silent. She had left with the keys to the house, and the woman who woke up, she was not going back to what they had built without her consent. Because when fate shifts the ground beneath you, you do not crawl back to safety. You rise. When I returned from the hospital, something about the house felt off. The curtains were drawn differently. The mail pile was smaller than I remembered. A lamp in the living room, one I had owned since the late 90s, was gone. In its place was a cheap-looking floor lamp that hummed faintly when switched on. My cane tapped against the wood floors as I moved through the hallway, each thud echoing through an emptiness that was not just physical. I opened the kitchen cabinets. Half of my china was missing. I stepped into the laundry room. My washer and dryer had been unplugged. It hit me slowly, cruelly, like fog settling over a graveyard. They had not just sold the house. They had begun clearing it out. And they had done it while I was still in the hospital. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, my hand resting on the chipped edge of the counter where Danielle once carved her name as a child. I had covered it with paint years ago, but I always felt the grooves when I wiped the counter. Now, even that small scar felt like a betrayal. That evening, Matthew showed up. He let himself in without knocking, as if he still had that right. He walked in, holding 2 takeaway coffees like this was a casual visit. I sat on the couch, my legs wrapped in a thin blanket, and watched him move around the house like a landlord inspecting a property. "Hey, Mom," he said, placing the coffee on the side table. "You are looking better." I said nothing. I figured we should talk about the house. Still, I said nothing. He continued, "I know you are probably upset, but we had to do something. The bills were piling up, the medical expenses. The house needed repairs, and with the market right now, it just made sense." He used words like "we" and "had to," as though I had given my blessing. But I had not. I stared at him, and I noticed something I had ignored for years. The confidence in his voice was not born of love. It was born of entitlement. Somewhere along the way, he had started to believe the house was his. I finally spoke. "You sold my house." He flinched. "Not much, but enough. We thought it was best." "No," I said softly. "You decided it was best, without me." He looked away. For a man who had always controlled the conversation, he suddenly had very little to say. That night, I could not sleep. I walked the hallway, my cane scraping the floor, and looked at all the picture frames. Charles holding baby Danielle, Eric in his graduation robe, me, younger, glowing with pride. All those memories, and they thought they could erase them with a signature. The next morning, Danielle called. Her voice was tentative, shaky. "Mom, Matt told me he talked to you. Please do not be angry. We were only trying to help." I asked her if she had come into the house while I was gone. She paused. I just took a few things I thought you would not need anymore. Some books, a few blankets." My voice trembled. "Did you think I was dying?" Silence. "Did you think you could just sort through my life and take what you wanted?" She began to cry. "Mom, please. We were scared. We thought we were going to lose you. We panicked." Panic. That was their excuse. I wanted to believe her. God knows I did. But a mother knows. And what I heard in her voice was not guilt, it was fear. Not fear for me, but fear that the lie was unraveling. And Eric? He did not call. Not that day, not the next. I did not blame him. He had always been the quiet one. But silence can be a betrayal too. The house grew colder. Not because of the weather, but because I could feel it changing beneath my feet. Every drawer they had opened, every item they had boxed up and taken away. It was like my life was being erased in real time. One night, I found a small wooden box tucked behind the bookshelf. Inside was a photo of Charles and me on our wedding day. Folded beneath it was a handwritten letter from him. One I had forgotten existed. If you ever feel alone in this house, Ellie, remember that you built more than walls. You built a life. You built a home with your heart. And no one, not even our children, can ever take that from you. Love always, see. I cried into that letter until the ink bled. And that was when I made the decision. It was time they knew the truth. I had already sold the house. The betrayal they thought they had inflicted had already been quietly undone. I did not tell them right away. I wanted them to stew in the silence. I wanted them to feel, just for a moment, what it was like to be left out of a decision that changed everything. But more than that, I wanted them to see me, really see me, not as the fragile woman in the hospital bed, not as the aging mother who lived alone, but as Eleanor Grace Whitmore, the woman who raised them, the woman who built a life, the woman they underestimated, the woman they underestimated. That was me. I was the woman they thought would stay quiet, would nod, would forgive, would fold herself neatly back into the corners of their lives, asking only for space enough to breathe and not be a burden. But that woman, the one who once apologized for being an inconvenience in her own home, no longer lived here. She died somewhere between the betrayal and the silence. In her place stood someone else, someone they did not recognize, someone I had almost forgotten I could be. I returned to the house after the hospital released me. Not as a resident, not really. More like a ghost visiting the scene of her own disappearance. The air felt colder. Things had been moved. Things had been taken. My favorite teacup, the one Charles gave me the year Eric was born, gone. The Afghan blanket my mother crocheted for our wedding, folded and missing from its shelf. Boxes stacked in the hallway that I never packed, labeled in black marker by hands that had never asked permission. It was as if they had already buried me, and all that remained was a quiet, empty shell they could divide up neatly. I moved slowly through each room, tracing my fingers over the outlines of memories. In the dining room, the old wooden table where birthdays were celebrated, where arguments flared, where laughter used to live, sat stripped of its linens, bare and indifferent. This was not a home anymore. This was a crime scene, and I was the victim, but also the survivor. Matthew came by later that evening. He let himself in with the same tone he had used since he turned 17. Like he owned every door he opened. He greeted me like nothing had happened. "Hey, Mom, you look good, stronger." I just stared. Strong? He had taken everything but the bricks from under me, and now he spoke of strength like it was a compliment. He launched into a speech about logistics, how the house had to go, how they had debts, expenses, how he thought I would be proud of their initiative. Proud? They had watched me fall and reached not for my hand, but for my keys. I did not say much, not yet. Sometimes silence can be more powerful than thunder. Sometimes silence is the only thing loud enough to break illusions. When he left, I sat alone on the couch, facing the blank space where my wedding photo used to hang. And I thought about all the things I had endured in this house: infidelity, illness, loneliness, and still, I had stayed. Not because I could not leave, but because I believed that love meant sacrifice, that motherhood meant being last, that silence was strength. But now I saw it clearly. All those years I had whispered my pain into pillows, swallowed my dreams, bit my tongue so hard it bled. I was not being strong. I was being erased, and I would not let that happen again. Not to me. Not while I still had breath left in my body. I made a choice that night, to stop shrinking, to stop explaining, to stop waiting for someone to give me permission to live my own life. Because the woman they underestimated, she was done waiting. She was done being broken politely. She was done loving people who could only love her when she was convenient. I went to the closet, pulled out the bag with the paperwork, the deed, the transfer confirmation, the bank receipt. I laid them across the dining table like evidence. This time, when I faced them, I would not be the mother. I would not be the patient. I would not be the woman begging for space. I would be something far more dangerous. Seen. It was on a Wednesday, gray sky, wind pressing against the window panes like a warning, that I invited them over. All three. Matthew came first, wearing that tailored jacket that always made him look like he belonged in boardrooms, not family homes. Danielle arrived minutes later, clutching a container of soup and anxiety in equal measure. Eric walked in last. He looked tired, older, eyes dulled like someone who had been watching too much without saying enough. They sat in the living room, just like they had on Christmas mornings. But now there was a tension that buzzed in the air like a live wire. No one reached for the coffee. No one asked how I felt. They were waiting, for scolding, for grief, for anything they could manage or control. I sat across from them, wrapped in my navy cardigan, the same one Charles used to say, brought out the steel in my eyes. My hands were folded. My voice, when it came, was measured. "I know what you did," I began. Danielle looked down. Matthew straightened. Eric did not move. "I know you sold the house while I was still unconscious in the hospital." Matthew cleared his throat. "We already explained." "No," I said. "You justified. There is a difference." Silence. Then I leaned forward and placed the folder on the table. The manila one. The one with the signed documents, the bank transaction printouts, and the letter from the real estate attorney dated months before my fall. You sold a house that was no longer yours to sell. Matthew blinked. Danielle gasped. Eric's mouth parted slightly, but no words came. I opened the folder and slid it toward them, letting the weight of paper deliver the blow I could not voice. I sold it 2 months before the accident. The deal was clean, legal, binding. Danielle shook her head. But how? Why? Because I was tired, I said. Tired of holding on to memories no one else valued. Tired of clinging to a life that stopped being mine when your father died. I sold it because I wanted freedom. Peace. A choice that was mine alone. Matthew reached for the papers, his hands trembling for the first time in years. But the furniture, the things we moved. You moved things that no longer belonged to you, I said. The new owners gave me permission to remain for a short period. I was paying rent, quietly, independently. Danielle whispered, "We thought you were dying." I looked at her. I was, but not from the fall, not from the hospital stay. I was dying from the way you all stopped seeing me as a person. A woman with thoughts, with boundaries, with pride. The room felt heavy. No one moved. I continued, my voice steadier than I expected. You thought you were saving me, but you were saving yourselves. From guilt, from responsibility, from having to sit still and ask me what I wanted. Eric finally spoke. His voice was hoarse. "Mom, I did not know. I should have called." I turned to him. "Silence is also a decision, Eric, and you chose it." He nodded, swallowing hard. Matthew stood. "So, what happens now? What do you want?" I met his eyes. For the first time in a long while, what I want matters. I stood slowly, walked to the window, and opened the curtains. The wind rushed in, cool and cleansing. Outside, the maple tree Charles planted decades ago swayed, red leaves scattering like whispers on the lawn. "I am moving next week," I said. "To where?" Danielle asked. "To a smaller house, quiet, by the lake, a place with no ghosts, no expectations." They looked stunned. "I am not punishing you," I said, "but I am done playing the role of the forgotten matriarch. I am done being the backdrop to your busy lives." Matthew's jaw tightened. He had always been the leader, but this time, the power in the room did not belong to him. It belonged to me. For once, I had drawn the line, and that line changed everything. Because once a woman draws a line, she does not return to the place she crossed it. Not in her body, not in her heart, and certainly not in her silence. That line I drew, between who I had been and who I was becoming, was not visible on the floor of the living room. But I felt it everywhere, in the stillness of my breath, in the way I stood straighter when Matthew spoke, in the way I no longer whispered when I had something to say. They had come into my house thinking they still knew me, that I would argue, maybe cry, then cave, like I always did. But I had given them their last surprise, and it was called truth. When I showed them the documents, the signed deed, the transfer confirmation, the proof that I had sold the house before they ever lifted a finger, they looked at me like they had seen a ghost. But I was not dead. I was finally alive. Matthew's jaw twitched. He tried to remain composed, but I saw it. The tightness in his posture, the flicker of disbelief in his eyes. Danielle gasped. Her hand covered her mouth as if it could stop the reality from spilling in. Eric looked down, ashamed. And maybe something deeper. I did not gloat. I did not raise my voice. I simply sat back in the chair where I had rocked them to sleep when they were infants. and I reclaimed my voice. "You sold a house that no longer belonged to you," I said calmly. It was Danielle who whispered first. "Why didn't you tell us?" I looked at her. Because I wanted to do something for myself. Just once, without being interrupted, questioned, or told I was being emotional. I turned to Matthew. "And because I knew what you would try to do. And you did it anyway." He opened his mouth, paused, closed it again. His power, had shifted. That was the thing about drawing a line. It does not scream. It does not plead. It just holds. And everyone feels it. "You went through my things while I was unconscious. You made choices about my life while I was recovering from surgery," I continued. "You did not wait. You did not ask. You assumed." I let the word hang in the air. Assumed. Such a simple word. Such a violent action. Danielle started to cry. I let her. Eric tried to apologize. I let him. Matthew stood, unable to sit with the shame. I let him walk. Because that line, it was not about punishment. It was about clarity. I was no longer the woman who needed their approval. I was no longer afraid of what they might think if I said no. I was no longer afraid of being alone. Because I had already been alone in a room full of my own children. When they left, the house was quiet. But the quiet did not hurt. It hummed. Like music I had not heard in years. Like truth echoing back to remind me, this is who you are. This is who you have always been. That night, I did not cry. I slept, deep, still, free. Because when I drew that line, I did not just reclaim the house. I reclaimed myself. In the days that followed, the house became quieter. But it was a different kind of quiet. Not the aching silence that filled the halls after Charles died. Not the lifeless hush of waiting rooms or lonely dinners. This silence had weight, purpose, boundaries. It was mine. I chose it. They did not call it first. Matthew, I suspected, was consulting with attorneys. Not because he wanted to fight the sale. I had done everything above board. But because he could not tolerate being outmaneuvered. He had always been the one who made the hard decisions. This time, I had made it without him. Danielle sent a bouquet, yellow roses, no card, and Eric. Eric sent nothing, but I found a sketch tucked into my mailbox 3 days later, a pencil drawing of the house from memory. No words, just shading, lines, and a single figure sitting on the porch. Me, alone. I cried when I saw it, because somehow it hurt more than any conversation could have. It meant he saw. He had always seen. He just had not spoken soon enough. I began packing. Each item was a chapter. The crocheted blanket Charles used during his chemo nights. The chipped vase from our 5th anniversary trip to Monterey. Danielle's ballet shoes, still faintly pink from stage dust. Matthew's high school football jersey, folded and forgotten in the linen closet. Eric's astronomy books, filled with underlined passages and post-it notes like little yellow stars of thought. I packed it all. Not because I was running, but because I was reclaiming. One night, I sat on the floor of my bedroom with an open box beside me and read the letter from Charles again. The ink was fading now, the creases deeper, but the words still held me the way his arms used to. You built a life. You built a home with your heart. I had, and I was about to do it again. The next morning, Danielle came to the door. No call, no warning. She just stood there, holding a casserole dish and something heavy in her eyes. "I wanted to talk," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I let her in. She walked through the living room like a stranger in a museum. as if every photo frame and piece of furniture told a story she was only now beginning to understand. "I am sorry," she said, placing the dish on the table. "We thought we were doing the right thing. We thought we knew better." I looked at her and asked, "Why did you not just ask me?" She stared at the floor. "Because we were afraid. Afraid you would say no. Afraid we would have to do something hard. Afraid we were losing you and did not know how to handle it." I nodded slowly. "And in trying to save me, you erased me." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I know," she whispered. She left after an hour. No hugs, no promises, just the quiet hum of consequences still unfolding. That evening, I sat outside on the porch. The air smelled like wet leaves. A light rain had just passed, and everything felt washed and raw. I thought about mothers, how we carry children inside us, how we feed them from our own bodies, how we sacrifice, delay, bend, and break for their growth, and how sometimes we disappear behind the very people we create. But I also thought about choice, and how, somewhere in the aftermath of motherhood, we must find ourselves again. Not as caretakers, not as survivors, but as women with voices. A week passed. Matthew called. He did not apologize, not directly, but he said, "If you need help with the move, let me know." And I said, "Thank you, but I do not." That silence afterward, it was not awkward, it was honest. And that was enough, because sometimes the truest conversations do not require words. Sometimes, silence is the only language strong enough to hold the weight of everything that has been broken, rebuilt, and buried between people who once shared the same roof. After they left that day, I sat in the doorway of the old living room, the room where my babies once napped against my chest, and stared at the walls that had watched me age. Not a single picture remained. Not a single sound lingered. Just me. Me, and a quiet that did not need to be explained. It was not loneliness. It was peace, wrapped in the clothes of stillness, the kind of peace that only comes after you have been seen, truly seen, not as someone's mother, not as someone's responsibility, but as a woman who drew a line and stood behind it. In the days that followed, no one rushed in to fix what had fractured. There were no long-winded apologies, no desperate attempts to undo the truth. Just shorter text messages, a few hesitant calls, mostly from Danielle. She called on the third night. "Mom," she said, her voice small, "I have been thinking a lot about what you said, about what we did." I said nothing. I let her speak. I think I was trying to hold on to something I had already let go of. I kept walking through that house like it belonged to all of us, but I think I just wanted to feel like we were still a family, like we were still yours. I did not tell her that we were never not a family. I did not rush to comfort her pain, to protect her from the discomfort of growth, because this time I needed her to sit in it, to learn from it, to not be rescued from it. I simply said, "I know," and she cried, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like someone shedding the weight of a lie they finally stopped carrying. A week later, I received a letter in the mail, handwritten, from Eric. He had never been good with words, not spoken ones. But the ink on that page told me everything his silences had never said. "Mom, I see now what I refused to before. You were right. You were always right. We took from you because we thought you would never stop giving. I never asked if you wanted to be saved. I just assumed you needed us to lead. But you were always leading, quietly, stronger than we deserved. I am sorry for everything. I folded that letter and placed it in the drawer beside Charles's old wristwatch, the one that stopped ticking on the morning he died. Because some things do not need to move to still carry time. Some things hold memory simply by being still. Matthew? He said nothing, but the silence he left behind no longer pierced me. It passed over me like a cold breeze, one I had already learned to dress against. I spent my final weekend in the house cleaning not for others, but for myself. I dusted the baseboards I had once painted. I mopped the floor where I had fallen. I opened every window and let the last of the old air escape through the rooms like a ghost finally being set free. I made myself tea in a clean mug, sat on the porch, and watched the sunset pour fire into the sky one last time. And I thought, maybe healing does not come with noise. Maybe it comes with silence, the kind that wraps around you and whispers, "You did it. You made it through." That silence afterward, it was not awkward. It was not empty. It was honest. And that was enough. It was moving day. The sun had just begun to rise, casting golden lines across the driveway as the moving truck pulled in, tires crunching over the gravel Charles once shoveled every winter. I stood at the window, hands clasped, watching the men in uniforms unload dollies and wrap blankets. Everything about that morning felt heavy and final. Then the knock came. I opened the door to find all three of them standing there. Matthew, arms crossed, jaw clenched, eyes darker than I had ever seen them. Danielle, clutching a paper bag of what looked like cookies, trying to soften the moment. And Eric, his hands in his hoodie pockets, looking like he would rather be anywhere else, but needing to be here. I stepped aside. "Come in." They followed me to the living room. Most of the furniture was gone now. Just a few chairs, the old grandfather clock that refused to work but still ticked in spirit, and the last box of photo albums. We stood facing each other, three children and the woman who had given them everything. Matthew spoke first. "You should have told us you sold the house." His tone was flat, controlled, but I heard the accusation beneath it. "And you should have asked before you tried to sell it again," I replied. He exhaled sharply. "This is not about just the house." I sat down. "Then say what it is about." His voice broke slightly. "It is about being shut out, about you making a major decision without involving us." "You mean the way you made one about my life?" His face tightened. "I sold the house because it was mine to sell. I told you that. But more than that, I did it because I needed to remember who I was before I became the afterthought in your lives." Danielle stepped forward. "You were never an afterthought." I looked at her gently. "You all visit. You call sometimes. But when I fell, when I was at my most vulnerable, you saw me as a burden, not a mother." Eric finally looked up. "That is not true." "You did not even call, Eric." He winced, looking away. I froze. I panicked. I did not know what to say. "You did not have to say anything. Just being there would have been enough." There it was, that word again. Enough. I stood slowly and walked over to the mantel, picking up a photo of the five of us at Yellowstone. Charles's arms around me. The kids, still young, faces sunburned and laughing. We looked whole back then. We looked like a family. "I am moving," I said again. "Not to punish you, not to run away, but to begin again, for me." Matthew's face flushed. "And what about us? Are we supposed to just accept this and move on?" I turned to him. "Yes. It was not cruel. It was clear. You are adults. You made choices, so did I. We all live with them. The silence was thick, but this time, I did not try to fill it. Danielle wiped her eyes. Can we visit you? At the new place? I gave a small nod. If you come as my children, not as my handlers, not as my decision makers, but as the people I love and raised. Eric looked like he might speak, but stopped. Then he walked over and hugged me. Tight, long, no words, just warmth. For the first time in what felt like years, I rested my chin on his shoulder and felt like I was holding my son again, not a stranger. Danielle joined, wrapping her arms around us. Matthew hesitated, then, without a word, stepped forward. All four of us stood there, in a house that no longer belonged to us, but held every piece of who we were. And for a brief, painful, healing moment, there was unity. Not perfect, not forever, but enough. Because sometimes healing is not a grand transformation. It is not loud or public or picture perfect. Sometimes it is three people standing in a half-empty room, sharing a silence that means we broke something, and we are trying to hold what is left. The night they came back, Matthew, Danielle, and Eric, I did not expect reconciliation. I had not even expected them to show. I had only left the porch light on out of habit. But there they were. No fanfare, no apologies rehearsed. Just presence. Real, heavy, uncomfortable. I opened the door slowly, and we all stood still in the threshold of old hurt. Eric looked like he had not slept. Danielle was holding her wrist like it hurt, but I knew it was just nerves. And Matthew, he looked the same on the outside, but his eyes had lost that hard edge, the one that always made me feel like I was the one who had failed him. We stood in the foyer, and no one spoke. So I did what I always do. I gave them a seat, even when I did not owe them one. They sat across from me, just like we had on Christmas mornings. Only now, the tree was gone, the lights were gone, and the illusion of peace had already shattered. Matthew cleared his throat. I did not come here to win, he said. I came because I am tired. That struck me. He was not asking for a fight. He was admitting defeat, not in shame, but in truth. Danielle placed a small envelope on the table. Just photos, she said. The ones I took without asking. I opened it. There they were. Charles holding Eric in the backyard. Me, holding a pie that had caved in the center. Danielle with her missing front tooth, holding a glitter-covered card she had made me for Mother's Day. I swallowed the ache in my throat. I cannot pretend it did not happen, I said. What you all did, what you almost did. Eric nodded. We know. But I also cannot carry this anger forever. It burns too close to everything else I love. That was the moment it shifted. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way, but in the soft way a fog lifts, revealing something familiar beneath. They started talking, not fast, not fluidly, but honestly. Danielle told me she had started therapy. She said, I realized I never asked what you wanted. I just did what I thought would make things easier. Eric admitted that he had always followed Matthew's lead. Not because he agreed, but because it was easier to let someone else take the blame. And Matthew, he sat with his hands clasped so tightly, his knuckles turned white. Then he said it. I was afraid you were going to die, and I realized I did not know how to grieve a mother I never really saw. He looked up, tears in his eyes. I kept taking control because that was easier than admitting I did not know who you were, without the house, without the role, without being our mother. I exhaled, because that That was the first real thing he had said to me in years. We did not hug. Not right away. We just sat there. 4 people. Bound by blood. Fractured by time. Trying. And for the first time in a long while, I was not the only one reaching. We made tea. We sat at the dining table. We passed sugar and memories and shame between us. It was awkward. It was quiet. It was real. And when they left, they each hugged me. Different hugs. Matthew's was stiff, like a man unused to tenderness. Danielle's was long and tearful. Eric's was the kind of hug that says, "I wish I had done this sooner." When I closed the door behind them, I did not cry. I smiled. Not because everything had been fixed, but because something had finally been acknowledged. Our family? Not perfect. Not forever. But enough. It was 2 weeks after the move. The lake house was quiet, nestled between evergreens and water that shimmered silver at dawn. I had begun to breathe differently there, slower, fuller. The air was not weighed down by ghosts or expectations. I had unpacked most of the boxes, left the memories in some, stored them on shelves in others. My days had structure now. Tea at 7, a walk by 9, a journal entry before bed. I had started writing again. Just thoughts, feelings, things I never said out loud. Then came the letter. No return address, just my name, handwritten in bold, unfamiliar strokes. I sat at the kitchen table, the envelope trembling slightly in my hand, as I slid a knife beneath the flap. Inside, I found a single sheet of paper. Typed, "Mrs. Whitmore, this is to inform you that your former residence at 1145 Pineview Lane was listed for private resale immediately following your departure. The party that initiated this process was your eldest son, Matthew Whitmore, who had been under the false belief that the property was still in your possession. The attempted resale was halted when legal inconsistencies regarding the title arose during closing negotiations. Please be advised that in an attempt to override the initial deed transfer, a separate power of attorney form, bearing your forged signature, was submitted. This matter has since been reported to the local district attorney's office for further investigation. We will be contacting you for a formal statement. Sincerely, Carter and Frank's Law Group." I stared at the page. The words blurred, then sharpened again like glass. A forged power of attorney. Matthew, my son. I stood slowly, my knees stiff, heart beating so loud it seemed to echo in the empty room. He had not just overstepped. He had attempted to steal from me, legally, deliberately, silently. I stumbled toward the drawer where I had placed the folder, the original deed transfer. I flipped through the pages. My signature, clean and confident, witnessed, stamped. And yet, someone had thought they could erase that with a lie. The betrayal settled deeper than before. This was no longer a child panicking. This was control. This was audacity. This was theft, wrapped in the false language of care. I called my attorney. He confirmed the letter. Yes, the forged document had been intercepted. Yes, Matthew had submitted it through a different law office. No, charges had not yet been filed. But they could be. He asked what I wanted to do. I said nothing for a long time. Then I told him, let him sweat. I did not want to destroy my son, but I needed him to understand that I would not be erased. That night, I wrote a letter of my own. Matthew, you were not raised this way. Your father would be ashamed of you, and I am disappointed beyond words. I do not need the law to remind you of the line you crossed. You already know. But let this be clear. I am no longer a woman you can manipulate. You took advantage of my silence. That silence ends here. From this moment on, I will not come to your rescue. I will not protect you from the consequences of your own decisions. Whatever happens next, you will face it alone. Mother. I sent it. No signature. Just Mother. That word would be enough. That word carried everything I had ever been to him, and everything I had finally stopped being. 3 days passed. No call, no reply. But I knew he had received it. The silence said so. It was different now. Not avoidance, shame. The same week, Danielle called me sobbing. She had found out. She had no idea he had gone that far. Eric sent a message. I am sorry, Mom. I should have stood up to him. I thought it was just panic. I was wrong. I responded simply, now you know. And that was enough. Because sometimes, truth does not need to be screamed. It needs to be witnessed. And sometimes, justice is not delivered in a courtroom, but in the quiet reckoning that follows a lie exposed. Because some betrayals are not punished with handcuffs. They are punished with truth. And the silence that follows when someone finally sees their reflection and does not recognize what they have become. It had been 3 weeks since they visited. Since we sat across from one another like fractured memories, trying to become people again. There was no shouting, no drama, only a fragile peace that hovered in the air like smoke from a fire just extinguished. Then the envelope came. It was thick, official, no return address, just my name, printed in a cold, precise font that made my fingers tremble before I even opened it. Inside was a letter from the real estate attorney. Typed, Director, devastating. Mrs. Whitmore, we regret to inform you that during a scheduled resale of your former property, a forged power of attorney form was submitted on your behalf. The document bore your name, your signature, copied with near perfection, but it was not yours. The individual who submitted the document was your eldest son, Matthew Whitmore. This matter has been flagged for potential fraud and will be forwarded to the district attorney's office. You may be contacted for a statement. I read the letter once, then again, then a third time, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something more forgivable. They did not. Matthew had forged my signature. He had not just overstepped. He had not just assumed. He had attempted to rewrite my decision, to undo my voice, because he believed, even after everything, that he could. And what hurt more than the betrayal itself was the quiet ease with which he had done it. He had always been the one who knew better, the one who made decisions for the family, the one who talked over me in the doctor's office when Charles was dying, saying, Mom agrees, even when I had not spoken. And now he had done it again, but this time with paper and ink and arrogance. I sat in the chair by the window, Charles's chair, and stared at the lake for hours. The sky darkened, the trees swayed, and I did not move, because when a lie that deep is uncovered, it does not explode. It settles, like ash on everything you thought was still standing. My lawyer called the next morning. We can press charges, he said. You have every legal ground. I asked him to give me time. He said, You are handling this remarkably well. But he did not know. I was not handling it. I was surviving it, like I had survived everything else. That afternoon, I wrote a letter to Matthew. You did not just try to take back a house. You tried to erase a decision I made, a decision I fought for, bled for, earned. You thought you could outsmart the law, but more than that, You thought I would not find out. You have always mistaken my quiet for weakness. But quiet women remember everything. I will not press charges. Because what you need is not a courtroom. What you need is to face the reflection of what you did, and live with it. You will not be hearing from me again. Mother, I sealed it, mailed it, felt the weight leave my hands and return to his. 3 days later, Danielle called me sobbing. He told me everything, she cried. He thought he could fix it before you found out. He thought he could flip the house and put the money back. I said nothing, because the thing about betrayal is, once it happens, words just feel like noise. Eric sent me a voice note, short, simple. I am sorry, Mom. Again, I saved it. But I never replied. That week, I planted new flowers outside the lake house, peonies, lavender, lilies, things that would bloom loud, unapologetically, without anyone's permission. I did not go to the police. I did not respond to the attorney's second letter. I let the silence do the work for me, because Matthew would carry that letter in his head for the rest of his life. He would remember forging my name, and he would know I knew. And sometimes, justice is not delivered in a courtroom, but in the quiet reckoning that follows a lie exposed. The lake was still that morning. The sun rose slowly, brushing the horizon with strokes of gold and lavender. I stood on the back porch of my new home, wrapped in my shawl, cradling a cup of coffee, listening to the sound of birds returning for spring. There was no rush in the air, no footsteps in the hallway, no phones ringing, just peace. The kind of peace that makes you realize how loud your life used to be, and how much of it was not truly yours. For years I had been the caregiver, the provider, the strong one. I had folded pain into corners, hidden disappointments in drawers, and smiled through the cracks in my soul for the sake of motherhood. I gave everything I had to raise them, and I do not regret that. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that I was still a woman who loved jazz on rainy mornings, a woman who used to paint wild flowers in sketchbooks she never showed anyone, a woman who once dreamed of visiting Rome just to stare at statues until her feet ached. And it took losing everything, my home, my pride, my illusions, to remember her again. My children still call sometimes. Danielle the most. She has begun therapy. She says she wants to unlearn what she thought love was supposed to look like. I tell her I am proud, because I am. Eric visits on Sundays. He brings books. Sometimes we do not even talk. We just sit on the porch and listen to the water. Matthew has not reached out in weeks. I do not chase that silence anymore. I do not try to fix it. I let it sit where it belongs, in the space between us, where trust used to live. The law firm followed up. They offered to proceed if I wished to press charges. I told them no, because the law may punish the crime, but it cannot rebuild what was broken. Only time and truth can do that. I found a local art class in town, nothing fancy, just a small group of older women who meet every Thursday to paint and talk and laugh like girls again. They call me Ellie. They do not know me as Mom, they know me as me. It feels strange and good. I started journaling again. Real journaling, not just the sad kind. I write down what the wind smells like, what the lake looks like at dusk, what I dream about now that I no longer wake up to ghosts. Last week I bought a pair of hiking boots. Next month I plan to use them, because I am not done, not by a long shot. I may have lost a house, but I found a home inside me. That is what no one tells you about rebuilding. It does not begin with hammers and nails. It begins with boundaries, with saying no when you used to say yes, with walking away from what wounds you even when it has your blood in its veins, with loving yourself like you once loved everyone else. I stood at the edge of the porch, letting the wind lift the hem of my cardigan. Below, the lake rippled like it was whispering secrets to the shore. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in years I felt whole, not because everything was fixed, but because I had finally said everything I needed to say, and that was enough, more than enough. Not peace, not happiness, not even love, but wholeness, the quiet, unapologetic kind that comes when a woman no longer waits for anyone to hand it to her. When she finally remembers, she can build it herself. The morning I moved into the lake house, the sky looked like melted gold. The air carried the scent of pine and newness, the kind that makes you believe even after everything you are still allowed to begin again. No one helped me unpack, not because they were not willing, but because I did not ask. I needed this to be mine. All of the first mug on the new shelf, the sound of my own footsteps echoing through bare rooms, the silence that followed when I realized no one was coming, and that was okay. For the first time in years I did not feel watched, or weighed, or quietly managed. I felt free. I began each day slowly. Tea before sunrise, a walk along the water's edge where the world still felt untouched by noise. I watched the trees sway, listened to the birds sing without fear, and sat with the understanding that this life, this chapter belonged only to me. There were still echoes. Grief has a long shadow, but grief cannot hold hands with a woman who is learning how to dance again, and I was learning. I picked up painting again, just watercolors, nothing grand. I painted skies the color of forgiveness, trees that bent but did not break, women without mouths, but with eyes that spoke volumes. I framed one and hung it above the fireplace. It was not perfect, but it was me. Danielle called often now, not out of guilt, but care. She asked about the birds nesting on my desk. She told me about the things she was unlearning in therapy. She sent me a birthday card with a handwritten note that read, "Thank you for letting me try again." Eric visited twice. He brought soup and silence, and we sat on the porch like we had nothing to fix, just air to breathe. And Matthew, he never called, never wrote, but I heard through Danielle that he had sold his car, that he had stepped down from his firm's board, that something in him had shifted. I did not feel revenge. I did not feel triumph. I felt done. I no longer needed him to come back. I no longer needed him to understand, because I was no longer trying to prove anything. I had proven it to myself. One evening, just as the sun sank behind the trees, I took a walk to the edge of the dock. The lake shimmered like it was holding secrets, and I stood there in the hush of twilight, arms folded, eyes soft. I thought of Charles, of the house we built, of the woman I had been for decades. I whispered, almost to the wind, "Thank you for carrying me this far." And then I stepped away, not from memory, but from the weight of holding on too long, because this quiet, honest, sun-washed moment was not an ending. It was the beginning of trust, of boundary, of a woman who remembered she was never just the mother, or the wife, or the widow. She was herself, whole, scarred, and finally seen. It did not look like a movie. There was no background music, no applause, just the soft rustle of leaves, the warmth of dusk on my skin, and the certainty, deep in my bones, that I had come home, not to a place, but to a woman, to me, because after all the loss, the betrayal, the silence, the unraveling, it was the beginning of everything I had almost forgotten I deserved. They thought they stripped me of everything, my home, my voice, my power, but in losing the house, I found something far greater: myself. I did not just take back what was mine, I became someone they could no longer control. Here at RL's Circle, your story matters too. Subscribe now for more true-to-life drama, where betrayal meets redemption, and let us know in the comments, if your own family betrayed you like this, would you walk away, or make them feel every piece of what they broke? Here at RL's Circle, your story matters too. Subscribe now for more true-to-life drama, where betrayal meets redemption, and let us know in the comments, if your own family betrayed you like this, would you walk away, or make them feel every piece of what they broke?